Let's discuss this further now with David Des Roches, who's a former Pentagon NATO operations director and a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute. Thank you so much for joining us. What targeting patterns do you see here with the Russians? Are they intentionally hitting these residential areas in Ukraine, or, you know, is this collateral damage from the military targets that they're...
Well, in the past, the Russians have been indiscriminate and have targeted residential areas specifically. I haven't seen enough to conclude. There's three possibilities. You know, the first rule of missile defense is what goes up must come down. Mm-hmm. So it could be a direct hit by a targeted strike. It could be that incoming missile was intercepted, the debris fell and did it, although that seems improbable because the scale of the damage suggests a successful detonation. Or it could be that an interceptor missile went wrong and that landed and hit it. That happens not all the time, happens very rarely, but it is possible. But given the pattern of Russia and the fact that Russia has been suffering a lot of losses as Ukraine targets the overland road to Crimea, I think it was deliberate targeting, seems most likely.
What types of weapons are they using here? Are they mostly missiles or drones also?
The level of destruction suggests a warhead that's too big for a drone. I think it would be a missile, and I think that Russia is probably going to the higher end of missiles. The higher the altitude and trajectory, the more difficult it is to intercept a missile. So if the missile goes low and on an elliptical pattern, then that's easier to intercept. I think if you go high, it's almost impossible to intercept.
Does that represent a strategic shift in Moscow's approach, or is this a tactical retaliation for Ukraine's attack last week on that school?
Excellent question. I think the latter. Russia has been using like the Oreshnik missile, which is could be used in an intercontinental ballistic missile exchange because it is basically indefensible. It goes so high, comes in so fast that unless your interceptor assets are almost co-located with the target, it's very hard to intercept.
And so how are the Ukrainians likely to respond to this? We've seen a lot of tit-for-tat attacks in recent weeks. What capabilities do the Ukrainians have to respond to this?
Well, the Ukrainians have generally not targeted civilian infrastructure. They've usually targeted military infrastructure far away from the battlefield. So they destroyed 2 maritime patrol aircraft at Tagarog airfield, which is very far to the east, and destroyed them. Those are impossible for Russia to replace. They've also been targeting the oil industry on the Sea of Azov and tugs in the Sea of Azov in southern Russia. I think that we'll see that, as well as increased pressure on the main highway that brings supplies into Crimea that runs along the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea.
But what about that school in Starobilsk that the Russians accused them of targeting last week?
Easy for you to say. Yeah, this is a problem. You know, when you fire missiles, there's again 3 possibilities. You could hit the target. You could have an intercept and debris do it. You could have a malfunctioning interceptor. You could also have a malfunctioning missile, or you could have a targeting error. But in general, when I look at the pattern of behavior, I don't see a strategy of deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure. The way with the Russians, we see not just targeting civilian infrastructure as a strategy, it appears, and we also see when Russian ground forces are present, like at the occupation of Bucha, a disregard for the law of armed conflict.
Right. The Ukrainian president had warned that Russia would be engaging in these systematic attacks. We've heard condemnation from NATO and Europe after that drone in Romania last week, which the Russians have said wasn't one of their drones. But what does this current intensity of the conflict suggest as far as where it's headed? We haven't had any peace negotiations in months now in this conflict. Where are we headed, do you think?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of this. I think Ukraine feels that its targeting of energy infrastructure and the logistic network that particularly sustains Russia's presence in the Crimea, that is a productive strategy for them. Putin, on the other hand, is basically in a regime existential war. He has to fight, and honestly, a ceasefire would just give him breathing time to reconstitute and attack. He attacked stupid originally. The next attack will be smart. All the stupid generals are dead on the Russian side.
What about NATO and the Europeans? They strongly condemn every Russian action, but beyond words of condemnation, what are they going to do? What are they likely to do?
Well, there's a significant increase in training and weapons being provided, particularly by the Europeans. And I think that will carry on, mostly because the new members of NATO, people who have suffered under Russian occupation, the Poles, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Putin's logic for invading Ukraine applies. It's just as valid a case for Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. They are members of the European Union, members of NATO, and they see an existential threat here. So I think NATO will remain steadfast. The United States, I think, is a point of concern, but at the end of the day, American interests lay with NATO. I think there's a lot of brinksmanship trying to get the Europeans to contribute more to their defense, but the relations are very strong.
David Des Roches, always interesting to talk to you about this. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.